Something important is quietly taking shape inside the Philadelphia Eagles, and if you really pay attention to the details coming out of this offseason, you start to see a front office that is not just reacting, it's carefully positioning this roster for a very specific kind of push in 2026. And one of the clearest signs of that direction is a move that on the surface might not look like a blockbuster, but could end up being one of the most impactful additions the team makes this year. The Eagles have brought in cornerback Woolen on a one-year deal worth up to $15 million, and this is where things get really interesting, because if you just look at the headlines, you might think this is a short-term, low-risk signing, but when you actually dig into the numbers and the context, this starts to feel like a calculated bet on upside that could completely stabilize one of the most inconsistent spots on the defense last season. Philadelphia spent a large part of last year trying to solve that second outside cornerback position. It was a rotating door at times, and that kind of instability in the secondary can quietly hurt a defense in ways that don't always show up immediately in box scores, but absolutely show up in critical moments. Now, with Woolen stepping in, there's a real sense that the Eagles believe they've found their answer, at least for 2026. And here's the part that really stands out. Woolen's production, when measured statistically, puts him in elite company. Over the past 4 seasons, among outside corners with significant playing time, he allowed just 0.7 yards per coverage snap. That's not just good. That's top tier, ranking ahead of some of the biggest names at the position, including his own teammate Quinion Mitchell and even a recent Defensive Player of the Year. That kind of efficiency doesn't happen by accident. But at the same time, this is not a flawless player, and the Eagles know that. Woolen has had moments where things go wrong, big moments. There have been games where he's been beaten deep at critical times, and there have been discipline issues, like costly penalties in high-pressure situations. Even his penalty rate reflects that inconsistency, so what you're looking at here is a player with elite measurable results, but also volatility, and that's exactly why this move feels so intentional. The Eagles didn't commit long-term money. They didn't lock themselves into a multi-year gamble. Instead, they created a scenario where Woolen can come in, compete, prove himself, and potentially reset his value, all while giving Philadelphia exactly what they've been missing at that position. Now, when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this move doesn't exist in isolation. It lines up with what the Eagles seem to be doing across the roster. There's a clear emphasis on maximizing this current window, especially on offense. There's already been talk about adding more weapons, even after bringing in help at wide receiver, with the idea that the team still lacks a long-term piece to pair with DeVonta Smith. The possibility of drafting a dynamic receiver like Omar Cooper Jr. only reinforces that mindset. Load up, surround the quarterbacks with as much firepower as possible, and go all in. And then on defense, there's another transition happening. Nakobe Dean moving on opens the door for a new presence at linebacker, and all the internal belief seems to be pointing toward Jihad Campbell stepping into that role. The expectations are not small. We're talking about a player viewed as having 3-down ability, someone who can cover, blitz, and stop the run with the kind of work ethic that suggests his ceiling hasn't even been reached yet. So when you connect all these dots, it starts to paint a very clear picture. The Eagles are reshaping key areas of this team at the same time. They're taking calculated risks, bringing in high upside players, and preparing younger talent to take on bigger roles. This isn't just about maintaining competitiveness. This feels like a deliberate attempt to redefine the identity of the team heading into a season that could carry massive weight for the organization. And that brings us back to the Woolen signing, because in many ways it represents this entire approach. High upside, some risk, short-term commitment, and a belief that in the right system, with the right support, the results will outweigh the concerns. But here's the real question, and this is where I want to hear from you. Do you believe this kind of strategy, betting on talent with inconsistencies while reshaping multiple key positions at once, is the right way for the Eagles to approach a do-or-die type of season? Or does it introduce too much uncertainty at the worst possible time? And that's where this conversation really starts to get deeper, because when you look at how the Eagles are structuring this roster, it's not just about individual moves anymore. It's about how all of these decisions are going to collide once the season actually begins. This is a team that is clearly embracing volatility in certain areas, and that can either elevate you to a completely different level or expose you in the biggest moments. Take the secondary again for a second. If Rick Woolen plays up to those elite efficiency numbers, suddenly the Eagles aren't just better at corner, they're potentially dominant on the outside. Pairing that level of production with Quinyon Mitchell could give this defense the kind of flexibility that changes how opponents attack them. It allows more aggressive play calling, more confidence in man coverage, and more freedom for the front seven to create pressure. But if the inconsistencies show up at the wrong time, if those same issues with penalties or blown coverages resurface in critical moments, then you're right back in the same situation that cost this team in key stretches last season. And that's the gamble. It's not about whether Woolen is talented. The numbers already prove that he is. It's about whether he can be reliable when it matters most. Now shift that same lens to the linebacker position. Jihad Campbell stepping into a bigger role is one of those moves that could define the identity of this defense. You're talking about a player who has been described as someone capable of doing everything. Covering, blitzing, stopping the run, a true three-down presence. And those kinds of linebackers are rare. If he delivers on that potential, this defense instantly becomes more balanced, more unpredictable, and more dangerous. But again, it comes down to projection versus proof, expectation versus execution. The Eagles are clearly betting that Campbell is ready not just to contribute, but to lead at that level. And if that bet hits, it changes everything about how this unit operates. Then you look at the offensive side, and the philosophy becomes even more obvious. There is a real urgency to maximize the weapons around the quarterbacks. The idea of adding another dynamic receiver even after already making moves at the position tells you that the Eagles are not satisfied when they're trying to overwhelm defenses. They want speed, versatility, toughness, and playmaking ability across the board. And that potential addition of a player like Omar Cooper Jr. fits perfectly into that vision. Someone who can line up inside or outside, stretch the field, and add another layer to the offense. Because let's be real, in today's NFL, having enough weapons is no longer enough. The best teams are the ones that can come at you in waves, forcing defenses into impossible choices. So what you're seeing from Philadelphia is a team that's not trying to play it safe. They're not just filling holes. They're making aggressive, calculated decisions to raise both the ceiling and, yes, the risk level of this roster. And that brings everything back to one central idea. This feels like a defining season, a season where the margin for error might be smaller because of the risks being taken, but the potential reward is significantly higher if everything clicks at the right time. A season where young players stepping into bigger roles, combined with strategic veteran addition, could either create a new identity for this team and or expose the growing pains that come with change. Because in the end, that's what this all comes down to. The Eagles are building a roster that, on paper, has the tools to be explosive, disruptive, and difficult to game plan against on both sides of the ball. But paper doesn't win games. Execution does. Consistency does. Discipline in the biggest moments does. And if those pieces come together, if the risks pay off, and the talent translates the way the front office clearly believes it will, then this could be a team that looks very different by the time the postseason conversation begins. So now I want to take this one step further with you. When you look at everything we just broke down, from the gamble on Woolen to the expectations on Campbell and the push to stack offensive weapons, do you see this as a roster that's being built to peak at exactly the right moment, or one that might struggle to find stability before it's too late? And if you had to pick one factor that will decide how this season plays out, what would it be? And if you really sit with that question for a moment, it forces you to look beyond just names on a roster and start thinking about timing, chemistry, and how quickly everything can come together or fall apart in a league like the NFL. Because what the Eagles are attempting here is not a slow build. This isn't a patient multi-year development plan where you can afford to wait for players to grow into roles over time. This feels accelerated. There's urgency behind these decisions, and that urgency raises the stakes for everyone involved. Coaches, veterans, and especially the younger players being asked to step up immediately. Think about how important early season performance becomes in a scenario like this. If Woolen comes in and locks down his side of the field from week 1, that confidence spreads across the entire defense. If Jihad Campbell quickly adapts and starts making plays in all phases, that stabilizes the middle of the field and allows the defense to play faster. And if the offense finds rhythm early, especially with potential new weapons being integrated, then suddenly all of these question marks start turning into strengths. But the opposite is just as real. If there's hesitation early on, if communication in the secondary breaks down, if the linebacker transition takes time, or if the offense struggles to find consistency with new pieces, then the pressure builds fast. fast. And in a season that already feels like it carries a do-or-die edge, that pressure can become a defining factor. That's why what's happening behind the scenes, in training camp, in film rooms, in practice reps, is going to matter just as much as what we see on Sundays. This team doesn't just need talent to show up. It needs cohesion to develop quickly. It needs roles to be clearly defined. It needs leaders to emerge and hold everything together when adversity hits. And one thing that shouldn't be overlooked is how the front office has structured flexibility into these moves. The one-year nature of the Woolen deal, the reliance on younger players stepping into bigger roles, these aren't long-term anchors. They're short-term bets with long-term implications. If things work, the Eagles can double down and build from a position of strength. If they don't, adjustments can be made without being locked into difficult contracts. So in a way, this season is not just about results. It's about evaluation at the highest level. Who steps up when given the opportunity? Who proves they can handle pressure? Who becomes a core piece moving forward? And who ends up being part of a temporary solution? Those answers are going to shape not just how far the Eagles go this season, but what this team looks like beyond 2026. And that's what makes this moment so fascinating. You're watching a team that is simultaneously trying to compete at a high level right now, while also quietly setting the foundation for what comes next. It's a balance that's incredibly difficult to get right. So as everything unfolds, every game, every snap, every key moment is going to feel a little more significant, because it's not just about winning or losing in the present, it's about what those results reveal about the direction of the franchise. And if you take that idea even further, it starts to feel like the Eagles are positioning themselves to be one of the most unpredictable teams in the entire league. And unpredictability, when it's controlled, can be one of the most dangerous weapons a team can have. Because opponents won't just be preparing for what the Eagles have been, they'll be trying to figure out what this team is becoming in real time. On defense, if Rick Woolen plays to his statistical ceiling while cleaning up those high-risk moments, and if Jihad Campbell truly evolves into that complete linebacker presence, you're suddenly looking at a unit that can adapt week to week, a defense that can press at the line, disguise coverages, send pressure from different angles, and trust its athletes to win individual matchups. That kind of flexibility forces offenses to hesitate, and in the NFL, hesitation is everything. Now combine that with a potentially reloaded offense. If the Eagles follow through on the idea of adding another dynamic receiver to complement DeVonta Smith and the rest of the group, you're talking about an attack that can stretch defenses horizontally and vertically at the same time. Speed on the outside, versatility in the middle, and the ability to create mismatches across the field. And this is where the identity shift becomes real. This might not be the same Eagles team people think they understand. It might not rely on just one strength or one phase of the game. Instead, it could become a team that wins differently depending on the matchup. Explosive one week, methodical the next, defensive driven when needed. That kind of versatility is what separates good teams from teams that are built to make deep playoff runs. But here's the truth that can't be ignored. For all the upside, this kind of transformation requires